Montana Territory, 1878. The brutal winter had finally released its grip on the Bitterroot Valley, leaving behind a landscape raw and vulnerable. Like the land itself, Owen Armstrong had weathered too many seasons alone, convinced that the frontier was no place for tender things like love or family. At 25, his lean frame carried the strength of a man who'd broken wild horses since boyhood, but his eyes, clear blue as mountain lakes, betrayed a weariness beyond his years. The small ranch he'd built with calloused hands represented everything he believed in: self-reliance, hard work, and keeping the world at arm's length. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, just how Owen preferred it. His parents had taught him that lesson when they died of fever his 15th winter, leaving him to fend for himself on unforgiving land. No attachments means no loss, he muttered to himself while mending a fence line as the spring sun climbed overhead. His herd wasn't large, 32 head of cattle, for horses, and the loyal cattle dog, Rusty, who followed him everywhere, but it was his. Nothing to share, nothing to lose, no one to disappoint. Yet sometimes in the deep silence of night, when the Montana winds howled through the gaps in his cabin walls, Owen wondered what warmth might feel like beyond the physical heat of his small hearth. He pushed those thoughts away as quickly as they came. Survival was what mattered out here. Dreams of companionship were luxuries he couldn't afford. What Owen didn't know, as he hammered the fence post that spring morning, was how quickly the life he'd carefully constructed would unravel, beginning with the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of the only general store in Pine Ridge, its wheels kicking up dust that danced in the late afternoon sun. Hannah Sullivan clutched her small satchel tightly as the driver called out, "Pine Ridge stop. 20 minutes only." At 20 years old, Hannah had never imagined she would end up in such a remote corner of the Montana Territory. Her chestnut brown hair was neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet, and her forest green traveling dress, while simple, spoke of the eastern refinement she'd left behind. Her emerald eyes scanned the single dirt street with a mixture of apprehension and determination. 3 months ago, she had been preparing to marry into one of Boston's finest families, until she discovered her fiancé had gambled away not only his fortune but her dowry as well. The scandal had left her family destitute, her father taking his own life shortly after. With her mother following him to the grave mere weeks later, Hannah had nothing left but the address of her mother's cousin who had settled in this frontier town years ago. "Miss, you getting down?" The stagecoach driver's gruff voice broke through her thoughts. "Yes, thank you." Hannah stepped carefully onto the wooden sidewalk, trying to ignore the stares of the few townspeople milling about. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but one dressed as she was practically screamed outsider. The general store owner, a round man with kind eyes, approached her. "You must be Eliza's niece. We got word you might be coming." Hannah felt a wave of relief. "Yes, I'm Hannah Sullivan. I was hoping someone might direct me to my cousin's home." The man's face fell. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news, Miss Sullivan. Your cousin Eliza and her husband both passed last month. Influenza took them quickly." The world seemed to tilt beneath Hannah's feet. Her last lifeline gone. I see," she managed, though her voice trembled. "The town's been maintaining their place, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "It's not much, just a small cottage and garden plot at the edge of town." Hannah straightened her shoulders. "It's more than I had a moment ago, sir." "That's the spirit," the man nodded approvingly. "Name's Thomas Baker. My wife and I run the store. You need anything, you come see us." As Thomas showed her to the small cottage that was now hers, Hannah took inventory of her situation. She had $12 to her name, a trunk of increasingly impractical Eastern clothes arriving on next week's stage, and no skills that seemed particularly useful in a frontier town. What she did have was her mother's silver locket, containing the only photograph she had of her parents, and the stubborn Sullivan pride that refused to let her collapse into tears despite the crushing weight of reality. The cottage was simple, one room with a small bed, table, 2 chairs, and a rudimentary kitchen area. The garden outside had gone to seed, but Hannah recognized some of the plants from her mother's garden back east. "Town meetings tomorrow night," Thomas said as he prepared to leave. "Folks will want to meet you. There's talk of needing a teacher for the children." After he left, Hannah sank onto the bed, finally alone with her thoughts. She had come west with nothing but desperate hope, and now even that seemed foolish. What did a Boston society girl know about surviving in Montana territory? As the sun set beyond her small window, Hannah removed her mother's locket and whispered into the gathering darkness, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough." But she would try, because out here, trying was all anyone had. The following evening found Hannah in the town's small church, which doubled as a meeting hall. She'd done her best with her appearance, wearing her least ornate dress, a simple blue cotton with minimal lace at the collar. Still, she felt conspicuously out of place among the frontier women in their practical, well-worn clothing. "As many of you know," announced the mayor, a tall man with a bushy mustache, "our schoolteacher, Mrs. Wilson, is leaving us to join her daughter in Oregon. We need someone to take over for the children's education." Hannah felt the collective gaze of the townspeople turn toward her, the newcomer, the outsider, the only person present with formal education. She swallowed hard. "Miss Sullivan," the mayor continued, "I understand you received schooling back east." "Yes, sir," Hannah replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I completed my education at Miss Porter's school in Massachusetts." An impressed murmur rippled through the crowd. "Would you consider taking the position? The pay is modest, $15 a month, but includes the use of the small room above the schoolhouse." Hannah calculated quickly. It wasn't much, but combined with what she might grow in her cousin's garden, it could mean survival. "I would be honored," she answered, surprising herself with her certainty. As the meeting concluded, Hannah found herself surrounded by mothers introducing themselves and their children. For the first time since arriving, she felt a flicker of possibility. Perhaps she wasn't entirely without skills after all. Walking home in the gathering dusk, Hannah nearly collided with a tall figure rounding the corner. "Pardon me, ma'am," came a deep voice as strong hands steadied her shoulders. Looking up, Hannah found herself staring into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a young man with sun-bronzed skin and dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. His lean face was clean-shaven, and though his clothes were worn, they were neat. A cowboy, clearly, but one who took care with his appearance. "No, excuse me," Hannah replied, flustered by the unexpected encounter. "I wasn't watching my path." The man's hands fell away from her shoulders as if suddenly aware of their impropriety. "You must be the newcomer everyone's talking about. The Boston lady." Hannah felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Word travels fast. Not much else to talk about around here," he said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Owen Armstrong. I ranch about 5 miles out. Hannah Sullivan." She offered her gloved hand in formal Eastern fashion before realizing her mistake. To her surprise, he took it gently, giving it the briefest shake before releasing it. "You're a long way from home, Miss Sullivan." "This is my home now," she responded with more conviction than she felt. Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of respect perhaps. "Well then, welcome to Pine Ridge. Though I can't imagine why anyone would choose this place when they had other options." Before Hannah could respond, he tipped his hat and continued on his way, leaving her with the distinct impression that Owen Armstrong preferred his own company to that of others, especially Eastern ladies with impractical gloves and uncertain futures. What Hannah couldn't know was that Owen had come to town specifically to learn about the newcomer everyone was discussing, or that as he walked away, he was already berating himself for his uncharacteristic curiosity about a woman who clearly wouldn't last a Montana winter. 2 weeks later, Owen was breaking a new horse when he heard the unmistakable sound of a wagon approaching his property. He frowned, securing the horse before turning to face his unexpected visitor. His frown deepened when he recognized Thomas Baker from the general store. "Armstrong," Thomas called, pulling his wagon to a stop. "Got a situation needs your help." "What kind of situation?" Owen approached cautiously, never one to eagerly involve himself in town matters. Thomas gestured to the back of his wagon. "School supplies. Books and such for the new teacher. Supposed to deliver them to the schoolhouse today, but just got word my sister's having her baby over in Clearwater. Need to head out right away." Owen crossed his arms. "And this concerns me how, exactly? Need someone to take these to town. You're heading in tomorrow for supplies anyway, ain't you?" Thomas knew Owen's schedule well enough. Everyone did, given how rarely the young rancher visited Pine Ridge. "Could wait a day," Owen countered, though he already knew he'd end up doing what Thomas asked. For all his desire to remain separate from town affairs, Owen had never been the type to refuse genuine need. Miss Sullivan's expecting these today. She's setting up the schoolhouse for classes starting Monday. Thomas was already climbing back onto his wagon seat. Just bring them to the school. Much obliged, Armstrong. Before Owen could protest further, Thomas had turned his wagon around and was heading back toward the main road, leaving Owen staring at the pile of books and supplies now his responsibility. With a resigned sigh, Owen hitched his wagon. The task would cost him half a day's work, but there was no help for it now. He loaded the supplies, changed into his least worn shirt, and headed toward town, telling himself his irritation had nothing to do with the prospect of facing those emerald eyes again. Hannah was standing on a chair, attempting to hang a map of the United States on the schoolroom wall, when she heard the wagon outside. Hastily securing the map with one more tack, she climbed down and smoothed her simple blue cotton dress, now adorned with a practical apron dusted with chalk. "Mr. Baker, thank goodness. I was beginning to worry," she began as she opened the door, the words dying on her lips as she found herself face to face with Owen Armstrong instead. He stood awkwardly on the schoolhouse steps, a crate of books in his arms. "Thomas had a family emergency. Asked me to deliver these." "Oh, I see." Hannah stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Please, bring them in." Owen hesitated only briefly before entering, his tall frame making the schoolroom seem suddenly smaller. He set the crate on the teacher's desk and turned to go. "There's more in the wagon," he said gruffly. "I'll help," Hannah offered, following him outside. Owen looked like he wanted to refuse, but instead nodded curtly. They worked in silence, bringing in the remaining supplies: slates, chalk, primers, maps, and a small globe that Hannah handled with particular care. As they brought in the last items, Owen paused, looking around the transformed schoolhouse. In just 2 weeks, Hannah had cleaned years of dust from the windows, arranged the desks in neat rows, and added touches that made the space feel welcoming. Wildflowers in a jar on the desk, children's names carefully written on small cards for each seat. "You've been busy," he observed, surprising himself by breaking the silence. Hannah tucked a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear, leaving a smudge of chalk on her cheek. "There's so much to do before Monday. 12 students, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. That's Morgan Cooper's age. Surprised he's coming to school." Owen knew the Cooper family well, hard-working ranchers whose teenage son was already taking on a man's responsibilities. His mother insisted. Said he needs his figures if he's ever going to run their ranch properly. Hannah smiled slightly. She was quite persuasive. "Sarah Cooper usually is," Owen agreed, finding himself oddly comfortable in this conversation despite his usual reticence. Hannah began unpacking books, organizing them by level on the small shelf behind her desk. "Have you lived here long, Mr. Armstrong?" "All my life." Owen found himself reaching to help with a particularly heavy stack. "My parents claimed land here when the territory first opened up." "And they still ranch with you?" Hannah asked innocently. Owen's expression closed. "They died. Fever. I was 15. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. It was a long time ago." Owen cut her off, not unkindly but firmly. "I should get back. Daylight's burning." As he turned to leave, Hannah impulsively called after him. "Mr. Armstrong?" He paused at the door. "Thank you for your help today. I truly appreciate it." Something in her sincerity made him uncomfortable, or perhaps it was the way the afternoon sunlight caught her hair, turning it to warm amber. Either way, Owen merely nodded before stepping outside into the safety of familiar solitude. Driving his wagon back to his ranch, Owen couldn't shake the image of Hannah Sullivan standing in that schoolroom, determination written across her delicate features. She wouldn't last, he told himself. Eastern women never did. The winter would drive her back to civilization, to proper society where she belonged. But deep in his heart, Owen found himself hoping she might prove him wrong. A dangerous thought he quickly buried beneath plans for tomorrow's fencing work. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing Pine Ridge in white by mid-October. Hannah had been teaching for nearly 2 months, falling into a rhythm that surprised her with its fulfillment. Her students were eager to learn, their parents grateful for her dedication, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, Hannah felt she might belong. That Monday morning, she rose before dawn as usual, stoking the small stove in her cottage before bundling up for the short walk to the schoolhouse. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving nearly a foot of pristine white covering the town. Hannah smiled at the beauty of it, still novel to her Eastern eyes despite the added challenge it presented. She arrived at the schoolhouse to find the stove cold, the interior nearly as frigid as outside. Hurriedly, she set about lighting the fire, knowing her students would arrive soon. To her dismay, the kindling caught, but the larger logs refused to burn properly, smoking badly before sputtering out altogether. Hannah was on her knees, coughing and trying again with the last of her matches, when the door opened. She turned, expecting to see her first student, but instead found Owen Armstrong stamping snow from his boots. "Chimneys blocked," he stated matter-of-factly, taking in the smoke-hazed room and Hannah's frustrated expression. "Saw the smoke backing up from the road. I can't get it cleared before the children arrive," Hannah said, fighting back tears of frustration. This was exactly the sort of frontier challenge she'd feared would expose her inadequacy. Without another word, Owen removed his heavy coat, rolled up his sleeves, and approached the stove. "You'll need to cancel classes today. Take the children to the church if they show up. I'll fix this." "But," Hannah began to protest, "unless you know how to climb on a snow-covered roof and clear a chimney?" Owen raised an eyebrow. Hannah conceded with a small shake of her head. As if on cue, the first students appeared at the door, red-cheeked and excited about the snow. Hannah quickly explained the situation, directing them to spread word that classes would be held at the church instead. As the children scattered, she turned back to Owen, who was already examining the stovepipe. "I'll come back once the children are settled," she said. "No need. I can handle it." His tone brooked no argument. But 2 hours later, after conducting an abbreviated lesson in the church's back room, Hannah returned to the schoolhouse with a thermos of hot coffee. She found Owen on the roof, the chimney now properly cleared, snow covering his shoulders and hat. When he climbed down and saw her waiting, a flash of surprise crossed his features. "I thought you might be cold," Hannah explained, offering the thermos. Owen hesitated before accepting it with gloved hands. "Thank you." "No, thank you. You saved my school day." Hannah watched as he took a grateful sip of the hot coffee. "Why were you passing by the school so early anyway? Your ranch is in the opposite direction from town." Owen seemed uncomfortable with the question. "I was checking fence lines after the snow. Happened to see the smoke." The explanation sounded thin even to his own ears. The truth was, Owen had found himself riding past the school more frequently than he cared to admit, telling himself he was simply being neighborly by keeping an eye on the Eastern woman who clearly needed help surviving Montana winters. He'd noticed the chimney needed cleaning days ago, but hadn't found a proper excuse to mention it. "Well, whatever the reason, I'm grateful," Hannah said simply. Something in her lack of pretense disarmed him. Most women he'd known would have used the opportunity to press for more conversation, more connection. Hannah just stood there in the snow, her cheeks pink with cold, accepting his help without demanding more than he was willing to give. "The stove should draw properly now," Owen said, handing back the thermos. "But you'll need more wood than you're using. The green logs won't burn hot enough." Mr. Baker said he'd arrange for wood deliveries, but they haven't been consistent, Hannah admitted. Owen frowned. "I'll have a word with him." "You don't need to. Children can't learn if they're freezing," he interrupted. Then, more gently, "It's no trouble." Their eyes met briefly, and Owen felt an uncomfortable warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. He broke the gaze first, pulling his hat lower. "I should head back. Cattle need tending after a snow like this." Hannah nodded, clutching the thermos with both hands. "Thank you again, Mr. Armstrong." "Owen," he corrected her impulsively. "Just Owen is fine." A small smile curved her lips. "Then you must call me Hannah." He nodded once, sharply, then mounted his horse and rode away without looking back, unsettled by how naturally his name had sounded on her lips. True to his word, Owen spoke to Thomas Baker about the wood deliveries. What he hadn't mentioned to Hannah was that he'd also arranged to provide half the wood himself, harvested from his own land. Twice a week before dawn, he'd leave a stack neatly piled behind the schoolhouse, timed so he'd be gone before Hannah arrived. December brought harsher weather and the news that delighted the town. The schoolteacher would organize a Christmas pageant, something Pine Ridge hadn't seen in years. Hannah threw herself into preparations, working with her students to prepare recitations, songs, and a simple nativity scene. The night of the pageant, the church was filled beyond capacity. Owen slipped in late, standing at the very back, telling himself he was only there because one of the calves from his small herd had been purchased for the community feast afterward. His contribution to the town's celebration, nothing more. But as Hannah stepped forward to welcome everyone, her face glowing in the lamplight, her simple green dress making her eyes sparkle like summer leaves, Owen couldn't pretend his presence was about obligation. Something about Hannah Sullivan had worked its way under his skin, past defenses built over a decade of solitude. The children performed admirably, their parents beaming with pride. When the final carol ended, the crowd moved to the tables set up for the feast. Owen hung back, uncomfortable with the press of people, but found himself approached by Hannah nonetheless. "You came," she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "Said I would," he replied, though he hadn't actually promised anything. The children were wonderful, weren't they? Even shy little Emma Cooper said her lines perfectly. Hannah's enthusiasm was infectious. Owen found himself smiling slightly. "You've done good work with them." Hannah blushed at the compliment. "Will you stay for the feast? Your beef is the centerpiece, after all." The mention of his contribution made Owen uncomfortable. He'd hoped to remain anonymous. "How did you know it was mine?" "Mrs. Cooper told me. She said you never sell your calves locally except for special occasions." Hannah tilted her head. "She seemed to think it significant that you'd offered one for the Christmas feast." Owen shifted his weight, avoiding her gaze. "It's nothing. Community obligation." Hannah seemed about to say more when they were interrupted by a group of children tugging at her skirts, begging her to join them at their table. She gave Owen an apologetic smile before being pulled away, leaving him both relieved and oddly disappointed. He was preparing to slip away unnoticed when Thomas Baker intercepted him, insisting he take a plate of food. Reluctantly, Owen found himself seated at a table with several ranching families he'd known all his life but rarely socialized with. To his surprise, the conversation flowed easily, centered mostly on cattle prices and weather predictions for the coming months. Across the room, Hannah moved between tables, checking on her students, accepting compliments from parents, her face animated with joy. Occasionally, her eyes would find his across the crowded room, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of two people who had both lost everything once and were cautiously rebuilding in their own ways. Later, as Owen prepared to leave, Hannah appeared at his side once more, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "Merry Christmas, Owen," she said softly, pressing it into his hands. Stunned, Owen stared at the package. "I didn't get you anything." Hannah smiled. "That's not how gifts work. You don't give to receive." Awkwardly, Owen unwrapped the package to find a knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "You made this?" Hannah nodded. "I noticed your old one was rather worn. I hope the color suits you." The color matched his eyes exactly, though Hannah would never admit she'd spent considerable time finding the perfect wool to match their shade. "Thank you," Owen said, the words inadequate for the warmth spreading through his chest. It's been a long time since anyone gave me a Christmas gift." Something in his confession made Hannah's eyes shine with emotion. "Well, then I'm especially glad to be the one to change that." On the ride home, with the new scarf wrapped around his neck and the memory of Hannah's smile warming him despite the bitter cold, Owen was forced to acknowledge a truth he'd been avoiding for months. His carefully constructed solitude was crumbling, and he wasn't sure he wanted to rebuild its walls. Winter deepened, bringing January blizzards that howled across the valley. Owen found himself thinking of Hannah each time the wind picked up, wondering if her small cottage was warm enough, if she had sufficient supplies. He told himself his concern was the same he'd show any neighbor, but the lie wore thinner with each passing day. The second week of January brought the worst storm in years. Snow piled in drifts taller than a man, and temperatures dropped so low that cattle huddled together in desperate attempts to survive. Owen worked from dawn past dusk, bringing his most vulnerable animals into the barn, breaking ice on water troughs, distributing the precious hay he'd stored for exactly such emergencies. On the third day of the storm, exhausted and chilled to the bone, Owen finally allowed himself to rest. He stoked the fire in his cabin to blazing, made a pot of strong coffee, and was just settling into his single armchair when an urgent pounding shook his door. He opened it to find Thomas Baker, his face red with cold beneath his snow-caked hat. "Armstrong, thank God," Thomas gasped. "The Sullivan woman, she's missing." Owen felt his blood turn colder than the air outside. What do you mean, missing? Storm hit during school. She got all the children safely to their parents, then said she was heading home. But she never arrived. Thomas's words came fast, clouding in the frigid air. We've been searching since we realized, but in this weather. Owen was already moving, grabbing his heaviest coat, gloves, and the blue scarf. How long? Almost 4 hours now. My wife found her cottage empty when she went to check on her. For hours in this cold. Owen refused to calculate the odds. I'll take the south road and cut across to her cottage, he said, his mind already mapping the most likely route Hannah would have taken. You've checked the school again? Twice. She's not there. Owen grabbed his rifle and a lantern. Get back to town. Organize another search party for the North Road. And have someone ready with hot water and blankets at the doctor's house. Minutes later, Owen was on his most sure-footed horse, fighting through snow drifts, the lantern's glow barely penetrating the swirling white darkness. The wind cut through even his heaviest clothing, and fear, an emotion he'd rarely allowed himself to feel since his parents' deaths, clawed at his throat. He called Hannah's name until his voice grew hoarse, scanning desperately for any sign of her. The rational part of him knew the chances of finding one small woman in a blizzard covering miles of territory were desperately slim. The newly awakened part of him refused to accept that possibility. An hour into his search, with daylight fading and hope diminishing, Owen spotted something dark against the snow near a stand of pine trees just off the road. He dismounted, fighting through a drift nearly to his waist, his heart pounding when the shape resolved into a human figure huddled against a tree trunk. Hannah, he shouted above the wind, dropping to his knees beside her. Her face was alarmingly pale, her lips tinged blue. Snow crusted her eyelashes, but at his touch, her eyes fluttered open. Owen, her voice was barely audible. Relief surged through him with such force he nearly collapsed. I'm here. I've got you. I got lost, she whispered. The snow couldn't see the road. Don't talk. Save your strength. Owen quickly assessed her condition. She was dangerously cold but conscious, a good sign. He needed to get her warm immediately. Without hesitation, Owen lifted Hannah into his arms. She felt impossibly light, fragile in a way that terrified him. Carefully, he placed her on his horse, then mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest. His cabin was closer than town, the decision obvious. Stay awake, he ordered as he felt her growing heavier against him. Hannah, you need to stay awake. Trying, she murmured. Owen talked then, more than he had in years, telling her about his cattle, about the spring calves expected, about anything he could think of to keep her conscious. When words failed him, he sang old cowboy songs his father had taught him, his deep voice carrying oddly in the snow-muffled landscape. By the time they reached his cabin, Hannah was drifting in and out of consciousness. Owen carried her inside, placing her gently before the fire. With efficient movements born of desperate necessity, he removed her snow-crusted outer garments, wrapped her in every blanket he owned, and set water to boil for tea. Hannah, he called, chafing her hands between his. You need to wake up now. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Confusion clouded her expression before recognition dawned. You're home, she whispered. Yes. Owen pressed a cup of hot sweet tea to her lips. Drink this. Small sips. Hannah obeyed, color slowly returning to her face. As the warmth of fire and tea worked through her, awareness returned as well, awareness of her situation, alone with a man in his home, propriety completely abandoned. The town, they'll be worried, she said, trying to sit up straighter. They know I'm searching for you. When the storm lets up, I'll get word to them. Owen gently pressed her back into the blankets. You need to rest. Hannah looked around the small cabin, neat but Spartan, with few personal touches save for a shelf of books that surprised her and a faded photograph of a smiling couple she assumed were his parents. Somehow, being in this private space felt more intimate than their physical proximity. Thank you, she said softly. I thought I was going to die out there. Something in Owen's expression shifted, a vulnerability breaking through his usual reserve. I wouldn't have let that happen. The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. The blizzard raged through the night, trapping them together. Owen insisted Hannah take his bed while he slept before the fire. In the small hours, when nightmares of freezing in the snow jolted her awake, Hannah found Owen already at her side, as if he'd sensed her distress even in sleep. "You're safe," he assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here." Hannah reached for his hand in the darkness, needing the anchor of human touch. "I've never been so frightened." Owen's fingers closed around hers. "In the morning, when the storm breaks, I'll take you back to town." "I know." Hannah hesitated, then said what weighed on her heart. "I'm not sure I belong here, Owen." Perhaps everyone was right. Eastern women aren't meant for frontier life. "That's not true." His response came quickly, fiercely. "You've done more for this town in 6 months than most have in years. Those children adore you." "But I nearly died in a snowstorm barely half a mile from safety," she countered, self-doubt overwhelming her. Owen was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was from Chicago. She came west to teach, just like you." He rarely spoke of his parents, the memories still painful. "First winter, she got caught in a blizzard too. My father found her nearly frozen. After he rescued her, she told him she wanted to go home." Hannah squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him to continue. He told her that courage isn't about never being afraid or never making mistakes. It's about getting up after you fall, learning, and trying again. Owen's thumb traced small circles on her palm. She stayed. They built a life together. It wasn't always easy, but she never regretted it. The story settled around Hannah like another blanket, warming her from within. "Your father was a wise man. He'd have liked you," Owen said softly, then seemed startled by his own admission. Before the moment could grow uncomfortable, Hannah yawned, exhaustion reclaiming her. Owen gently withdrew his hand. "Sleep. You're safe now." As she drifted off, Hannah realized that for the first time since arriving in Montana, she truly felt safe, not because of walls or locks or provisions, but because of the quiet strength of the man keeping watch over her through the long, cold night. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a transformed white landscape under brilliant blue skies. Owen had risen early, tending to his animals before returning to find Hannah awake, her hair loose around her shoulders, his mother's old brush in her hands. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the brush. "I found it on the washstand." "It was my mother's," Owen replied, an odd tightness in his throat at the sight of Hannah using it. "She'd be glad it's being used again." They shared a simple breakfast of coffee, biscuits, and dried apple slices. The domesticity of the scene struck Owen with unexpected force. How natural it felt to have Hannah at his table, in his home. "The town will be worried," Hannah said finally, reluctance clear in her voice. "Yes." Owen stood, gathering his resolve along with his coat. "I'll take you back." The ride to town was made mostly in silence, both lost in thoughts of what had changed between them. As they approached Pine Ridge, Hannah sitting sideways before him on the saddle, Owen felt the eyes of the town upon them, knew what conclusions would be drawn from her spending the night at his cabin, regardless of the circumstances. "Your reputation," he began awkwardly, "is less important than my life," Hannah finished firmly. Let them talk if they must. But to their surprise, the town's reaction was far from scandalous judgment. When they arrived at the doctor's house, they found a crowd gathered, a search party preparing to head out again despite the dangerous conditions. At the sight of Hannah, safe in Owen's arms, cheers erupted. Mrs. Baker rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my dear girl. We thought we'd lost you." The doctor insisted on examining Hannah despite her protests that she was fine. Owen found himself surrounded by men clapping his shoulder, thanking him, treating him not as the solitary figure they'd respected from a distance, but as a hero, a true member of the community. The experience was disorienting, uncomfortable, and yet, watching Hannah smile weakly at the doctor's wife, Owen couldn't bring himself to regret any of it. Later, after Hannah had been declared healthy but ordered to rest, Owen prepared to leave. He'd said his goodbyes, was nearly to his horse when Hannah's voice stopped him. "Owen." He turned to find her standing in the doorway of the doctor's house, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. "You should be resting," he admonished gently. Hannah took a step toward him, ignoring the curious onlookers. "I never properly thanked you." "No need," Owen said, shifting uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't anyone. It was you." Her emerald eyes held his steadily. "You saved my life." Something unspoken passed between them, a current stronger than the wind that had nearly claimed her. Owen found himself taking a half-step toward her before remembering where they stood, who might be watching. "Rest," he said instead. "I'll check on you in a few days." It wasn't what he wanted to say, but it was all he could manage with his heart threatening to break through the careful barriers he'd constructed over years of solitude. Hannah nodded, understanding both what was said and what remained unspoken. "I'll be waiting." As Owen rode home, the landscape familiar yet somehow changed. He recognized the truth he could no longer deny. His life of chosen isolation had been irrevocably disrupted by a chestnut-haired schoolteacher with more courage than she knew. The realization terrified him more than any blizzard ever could. Spring came to Montana in fits and starts. Warm days followed by snow flurries, muddy roads that froze overnight, wildflowers pushing through patches of lingering white. By April, the transformation was complete, the valley a riot of green and color after the long white winter. Hannah had fully recovered from her ordeal, though the town treated her with new respect. No longer the Eastern outsider, but a woman who had faced frontier hardships and survived. School continued, her students thriving under her care, and if people noticed how frequently Owen Armstrong's horse could be seen tied outside the schoolhouse after hours, they kept their observations to themselves. A tentative friendship had developed between them since the blizzard. Owen would bring fresh meat or vegetables from his early garden, claiming it was neighborly assistance, but lingering to discuss books from his surprisingly extensive library, or simply to listen as Hannah shared stories of her students' progress. For Hannah, these visits had become the highlight of her week. She found herself looking for excuses to extend them, a passage from a book she wanted to share, a question about gardening that could have waited. Owen's reserve had softened around her, revealing glimpses of the thoughtful, intelligent man beneath the taciturn exterior. One warm evening in late April, Owen arrived with a basket of early strawberries and the news that his mare had delivered a healthy foal just before dawn. "You must be exhausted," Hannah said, pouring him coffee as they sat on the small porch of her cottage. "Were you up all night with her?" Owen nodded, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners, the closest he came to a full smile. "Worth every minute. The foal's already standing, strong legs on her." "Her? A filly then?" "Yes, black with a white star, just like her mother." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. Hannah sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim of her cup. "Have you named her yet?" A slight flush colored Owen's tanned cheeks. "I was thinking, Hannah might be a good name, if you don't mind." The simple gesture touched her deeply. "I'd be honored." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped toward the mountains, painting the valley in gold. Hannah found herself studying Owen's profile, the strong jaw now softened by several days' stubble, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against Montana's sun. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, catching her gaze. Hannah considered deflecting but opted for honesty. "That you're not at all who I thought you were when we first met." Owen's expression turned curious. "And who did you think I was?" "A gruff, unfriendly cowboy who preferred cattle to people." She smiled to soften the assessment. "That's a fair description," Owen admitted with a short laugh. "I've worked hard to earn that reputation. But it's not the whole truth, is it?" Hannah pressed gently. "The man who rescued me, who names foals after school teachers, who discusses Shakespeare and Thoreau, he's not just the solitary rancher." Owen set his coffee cup down, suddenly serious. "Perhaps not. But that solitary rancher is who I've been for a long time. It's safer." "Safer than what?" His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "Than caring. Than risking loss again." Hannah's heart quickened. This was the most direct either had come to addressing the growing connection between them. "Is that what you're doing with me, Owen? Risking loss?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Owen stood abruptly, moving to the porch railing, his back to her as he stared out at the darkening valley. "I should go? The cattle need checking before full dark." Hannah felt disappointment wash through her, but she didn't press. Owen's walls had been built over years. They wouldn't come down in a single evening. As she walked him to his horse, Owen paused, seeming to struggle with something. Finally, he spoke. "The spring social is next weekend. Would you save me a dance?" The request, so formal and yet so significant coming from him, made Hannah's heart soar. "I'd like that very much." Owen nodded once, sharply, mounted his horse, and rode away without looking back. But Hannah stood watching until horse and rider disappeared into the gathering twilight, hope blooming in her chest like the wildflowers dotting the valley. The spring social was Pine Ridge's most anticipated event, marking winter's end and the promise of new beginnings. The town hall had been decorated with early flowers and ribbons, tables laden with food prepared by every family. A small band of local musicians provided lively tunes that had couples spinning across the wooden floor. Hannah arrived wearing her best dress, a soft yellow cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She'd pinned her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style, with a few curls framing her face. As the new schoolteacher, she was immediately drawn into conversations with parents and community members, but her eyes kept drifting to the door. An hour passed with no sign of Owen. Then another. The dancing was well underway, Hannah having already been claimed for several sets by various town men. When she finally accepted the truth, he wasn't coming. Disappointment settled heavily in her chest. Had she misunderstood? Had something happened at the ranch? Or had Owen simply retreated back behind his walls of solitude, finding the prospect of a public declaration? For that's what dancing together would be in a town this size. Too daunting? Hannah was considering an early departure when the door opened, and the object of her thoughts stepped through. Owen had clearly made an effort with his appearance, his hair freshly trimmed, face clean-shaven, wearing a new shirt under his best vest. His eyes found hers immediately across the crowded room, and the intensity of his gaze nearly stole her breath. He made his way toward her, nodding acknowledgments to those who greeted him, but never breaking eye contact with Hannah. When he reached her, he removed his hat, revealing hair still damp from recent washing. "You came," Hannah said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "I promised you a dance," Owen replied. His expression was serious, almost solemn. "I apologize for being late. One of the calves got itself stuck in mud down by the creek." The explanation was so perfectly Owen, duty to his ranch above all, that Hannah couldn't help smiling. "You're here now? That's what matters." As if on cue, the band began a waltz. Owen hesitated only briefly before offering his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Sullivan?" Hannah placed her hand in his. "You may, Mr. Armstrong." They moved onto the floor, joining other couples already swirling to the music. Owen's hand at her waist was tentative at first, proper distance maintained between them. But as they moved together, finding unexpected harmony in their steps, Hannah felt the tension in him ease. "I can't remember the last time I danced," he admitted quietly. "You dance beautifully," Hannah replied. It was true. He moved with the natural grace of a man accustomed to physical work, his inherent coordination making up for any lack of practice. Owen's eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "So do you. But then, you do everything beautifully." The compliment, delivered in his straightforward manner, caught Hannah off guard. "Not everything. I nearly froze to death in a blizzard, remember?" "Even then," he said softly, "even half frozen, you were the strongest person I've ever known." The music continued around them, but Hannah barely heard it. The world had narrowed to just the two of them, to the feeling of Owen's hand warm against her waist, to the emotion in his blue eyes that he no longer tried to hide. "Owen," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, the music ended. Couples around them broke apart, applauding the musicians. Owen released her reluctantly, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Would you like some punch?" he asked, clearly unwilling to end their time together. "Yes, please." As Owen went to fetch refreshments, Hannah found herself approached by Mrs. Baker, whose knowing smile suggested she'd been watching them closely. "It does my heart good to see Owen Armstrong dancing again," the older woman said. "That young man has kept himself apart for far too long." Hannah wasn't sure how to respond, unwilling to discuss Owen with others, even kindly ones. Mrs. Baker patted her hand. "Don't worry, dear. I'm not gossiping. Just happy to see two people I care about finding joy in each other's company." She lowered her voice confidentially. "You know, before you came, that boy hadn't set foot in a social gathering in nearly 5 years." The revelation settled into Hannah's heart, adding weight to what had seemed a simple dance. Before she could respond, Owen returned with 2 cups of punch. Mrs. Baker excused herself with a meaningful glance that made Hannah blush. "What was that about?" Owen asked, handing her a cup. Nothing important, Hannah deflected. Would you like to step outside? It's rather warm in here. They made their way to the porch, where the cool spring evening provided welcome relief from the crowded hall. Stars dotted the clear sky, and the scent of apple blossoms filled the air from the small orchard behind the building. Owen leaned against the railing, looking more relaxed than Hannah had ever seen him in a public setting. I'd forgotten what these gatherings could be like. Not entirely unpleasant. Hannah laughed softly. High praise indeed from Owen Armstrong. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his features and made Hannah's heart skip. I meant what I said earlier. About your strength. I don't feel particularly strong, Hannah admitted. Most days I'm just trying not to reveal how little I know about frontier life. That's exactly what makes you strong. Facing something unfamiliar, difficult, and doing it anyway. Owen turned to face her fully. When I found you in that blizzard, half frozen but still conscious, still fighting, I've never admired anyone more. Hannah set her punch aside, moved by the raw honesty in his voice. That night changed me, made me realize that safety isn't always about avoiding danger. Sometimes it's about knowing someone will come looking for you if you're lost. Something shifted in Owen's expression, a decision being made, barriers finally falling. Hannah, he was interrupted by Thomas Baker bursting onto the porch, his face grave. Owen, there you are. Fire up at the Wilsons' place. Lightning strike from that storm passing north. We need every man. Owen straightened immediately, instincts shifting to the emergency. Stables and barn? Or house? Barn's already gone. They're trying to save the house and get the livestock clear. Hannah watched the transformation, the momentary openness replaced by efficient purpose. Owen turned to her, apology in his eyes. Go, she said before he could speak. They need you. He hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll call on you tomorrow. Then he was gone, joining the men already mounting up in front of the hall. Hannah watched them ride out, a knot of worry forming in her stomach. She knew frontier fires could be devastating, unpredictable. New men died fighting them. The moment they'd been building toward all evening, perhaps for months, had been shattered by emergency. As Hannah rejoined the social, now buzzing with concern for the Wilson family, she couldn't shake the feeling that Owen had been about to say something vitally important. She could only pray he'd have the chance to say it tomorrow. The Wilson fire raged through the night, requiring every able-bodied man in the area to contain it. By dawn, the barn was a smoking ruin, but the house had been saved and no lives lost, human or animal. The men returned to town exhausted, smoke-stained, but satisfied with their efforts. Owen had worked tirelessly alongside neighbors he'd kept at arm's length for years, reminded of the community he'd distanced himself from after his parents' deaths. As he rode home in the early morning light, bone-weary but strangely content, his thoughts returned to Hannah and the moment that had been interrupted. After tending his animals and washing away the worst of the smoke and grime, Owen changed into clean clothes and made a decision. Despite his exhaustion, despite the early hour, he needed to see Hannah, to finish what he'd started to say. He rode to her cottage, rehearsing words that never seemed adequate for what he needed to express. When he arrived, he was surprised to find her already awake, hanging laundry in the early morning sunshine. She turned at the sound of his horse, her face lighting with relief when she saw him. You're safe, she said, meeting him halfway across her small yard. I was so worried. It was a bad fire, Owen admitted, dismounting. But we got it under control. No one was hurt. Hannah reached up without thinking, brushing a smudge of soot he'd missed from his cheek. The simple gesture, her touch on his face, stopped Owen's breath. You must be exhausted, Hannah said, suddenly self-conscious, withdrawing her hand. I am, he acknowledged. But there was something I needed to say to you. Something I was trying to say last night before we were interrupted. Hannah's eyes widened slightly. Would you like to come inside? I've just made coffee. Owen shook his head. No, I need to say this now, while I have the courage. He took a deep breath. Last night, dancing with you, I realized something I've been fighting for months. Hannah stood perfectly still, hardly breathing. When my parents died, I decided that caring for people wasn't worth the pain of losing them. That I was better off alone, safe behind walls I built myself. Owen's voice grew rough with emotion. But you walked right through those walls like they weren't even there. Owen, Hannah began, but he gently raised a hand. Please, let me finish. I need to say this. He drew another steadying breath. Fighting that fire last night, working alongside men I've known all my life but kept at a distance, I understood something important. Life, real life, isn't about being safe. It's about connections, community, taking risks that matter. Owen reached for her hands, holding them between his own. I've been alone for so long I forgot what it was like to care this deeply. It terrifies me, Hannah. But not caring terrifies me more now. Tears shimmered in Hannah's eyes. What are you saying, Owen? I'm saying I love you, he said simply, the words falling between them like stones in still water. I love your courage, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you see beauty in this harsh place. I love how you've made me remember what it means to be part of something larger than myself. A tear slipped down Hannah's cheek. I love you too. I think I have since the day you fixed the schoolhouse chimney and pretended you just happened to be passing by. Owen's face registered surprise, then sheepish acknowledgement. You knew? Your ranch is 5 miles in the opposite direction, Hannah reminded him with a watery smile. It was a rather transparent excuse. Owen laughed, a free, open sound Hannah had never heard from him before. Then, with a gentle reverence that made her heart ache, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The kiss was tentative at first, both of them uncertain in this new territory. But as Hannah's arms slipped around his waist, drawing him closer, the kiss deepened, becoming a promise, a declaration more profound than words could express. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I never thought I'd find this again. A home, someone to belong to. Nor I, Hannah whispered. After losing my family, coming west felt like my last desperate chance. I never imagined I'd find love here. Owen drew back slightly, his expression suddenly serious. Hannah Sullivan, I'm not a wealthy man. My ranch is small, the work is hard, and Montana winters are brutal. I can't give you the comfortable life you might have had back east. Hannah placed her fingers gently against his lips. I don't want that life. I want this one with you. I can't give you much, she whispered, thinking of her own modest possessions, her teacher's salary, the simple life she could offer compared to what might have been hers in Boston. The cowboy smiled and said, Your love is everything. Owen and Hannah were married that June in the town church, with the entire community in attendance. Hannah wore a simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair. Owen wore a new suit that made him look younger, less weathered by solitude and hard work. Thomas Baker gave the bride away, his wife dabbing tears throughout the ceremony. Hannah's students sang a song they prepared specially, their young voices filling the small church with joy. As the couple spoke their vows, those who had known Owen longest marveled at the transformation in him, the openness in his expression, the easy smile that once had been so rare. Hannah, too, had changed, the uncertain Eastern girl replaced by a confident woman who had found her place in this rugged territory. After the ceremony, the entire town celebrated with a feast that lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and laughter, stories and well wishes. When it was time for the newlyweds to depart for the ranch that would now be their shared home, they were sent off with cheers and scattered flower petals. Owen had spent weeks preparing for Hannah's arrival, expanding the cabin, adding a proper kitchen, building bookshelves for their combined libraries. As they approached in the wagon, Hannah gasped at the sight of wildflowers planted along the path to the door, a touch of beauty Owen had added knowing how she loved the native blossoms. At the threshold, Owen surprised her by lifting her into his arms. Welcome home, Mrs. Armstrong, he said softly before carrying her inside. The cabin was transformed, not just by the physical improvements, but by the simple presence of items from Hannah's cottage now integrated with Owen's possessions. Their books shared shelves, her quilts layered with his blankets, 2 rocking chairs positioned before the hearth. It's perfect, Hannah whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. It wasn't before, Owen said, drawing her into his arms. It was just a place I lived. You make it a home. Later, as twilight settled over the valley and the first stars appeared, they sat on the porch of their cabin, Hannah nestled against Owen's side. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, and closer to the house, a black filly with a white star, little Hannah, pranced in the paddock. Are you happy? Owen asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Hannah lifted her face to his, eyes shining in the gathering dusk. Completely. Are you? Instead of answering with words, Owen kissed her. A kiss that spoke of promises kept, of walls torn down, of a love strong enough to transform a solitary rancher and a displaced Easterner into something new and unbreakable. When they finally parted, Hannah rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. I used to think I needed to be rescued from this place, she mused. Now I realize it rescued me. Owen's hand gently stroked her hair. We rescued each other, I think. As night settled fully over the Montana Valley, the couple remained on their porch, talking softly of the future they would build together. A future that might include children, an expanded ranch, challenges and joys they would face as one. The path that had brought them together, from Boston society to Montana blizzard, from self-imposed isolation to profound connection, had not been easy. But as they sat wrapped in each other's arms under a canopy of stars, both Owen and Hannah knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. In the vastness of the American frontier, they had found something precious beyond measure, a love that made them both stronger, braver, more completely themselves than either had believed possible. And in that discovery, they had found home.